At 2:47 in the morning, the radar operators at Ben Gurion International Airport detected something that should have been impossible. 12 ballistic missiles, inbound, simultaneously. The Iron Dome batteries positioned around the airport perimeter activated immediately. 31 interceptors launched into the night sky above Tel Aviv. The defensive system did exactly what it was designed to do. It tracked the incoming threats. It calculated intercept solutions. It fired. Not one interception succeeded. 2 minutes later, Israel's only international airport was gone. What happened in those 2 minutes was not a lucky strike. It was not a malfunction. It was not a failure of Israeli vigilance or preparation. It was the operational demonstration of a weapons system specifically engineered to make everything Israel had built to protect itself completely irrelevant, and to understand the full weight of what those 2 minutes mean, not just for Israel, not just for this conflict, but for every military doctrine, every defense procurement decision, and every strategic calculation being made in capitals around the world right now. You need to understand what was flying toward Ben Gurion that morning, why it worked, and why nothing in Israel's arsenal was capable of stopping it. Because this is not a story about one airport. This is a story about the moment a $100 million defensive system met the weapon that made it obsolete. 9 people were killed. Ben Gurion International Airport sits on the coastal plain of Israel, approximately 15 kilometers southeast of Tel Aviv. It handles more than 20 million passengers annually. It processes the overwhelming majority of Israel's international passenger traffic, its cargo operations, its business travel, its medical evacuations, and the military logistics that depend on civilian air infrastructure. Tourism revenue runs through it, foreign investment flows through it, emergency supply chains run through it. The basic projection of Israeli national stability, the visible daily evidence that a country is functioning normally, runs through it. Israel has 2 other airports, Haifa in the north, Eilat in the south. Neither can accommodate wide-body international aircraft, neither can handle Boeing 787 Dreamliners or Airbus A350s, the aircraft that carry the passenger and cargo volumes that make international connectivity economically meaningful. They are designed for regional turboprops and smaller jets, domestic hops and short regional routes. For the kind of international operations that connect Israel to the global economy, Ben Gurion is not the primary option. It is the only option. That geographic and infrastructural reality is the strategic context without which the attack on the morning of March 14th cannot be properly understood. Iran did not choose Ben Gurion because it was the most visible target or the most symbolically resonant. Iran chose Ben Gurion because it understood something about Israeli infrastructure that most Western analysts had spent years deliberately not emphasizing. A country with 1 international airport has 1 throat, and on the morning of March 14th, 12 missiles were aimed directly at it. The weapon that carried out the strike was the Shikan-4, a ballistic missile that has been in Iranian development for several years, but had never been used in an attack of this scale or precision against this category of target. To understand why it succeeded where Iranian missiles had previously failed, and why the Iron Dome's 31 interceptors accomplished nothing, you need to understand what makes the Shikan-4 fundamentally different from the ballistic missile threat that Israeli air defenses were designed and optimized to intercept. A conventional ballistic missile follows a predictable trajectory. It is launched, it follows a ballistic arc, and it descends toward its target along a flight path that, while fast, is calculable. Modern missile defense systems like the Iron Dome, the Arrow, and David's Sling are built around this calculability. They detect the incoming missile, compute its trajectory, determine the intercept point, and fire an interceptor missile that will arrive at that intercept point at the right moment to destroy the incoming threat. The system works. Against conventional ballistic missiles, it has worked with considerable effectiveness throughout this conflict and in previous confrontations. The Shikan-4 was not designed to be a conventional ballistic missile. It was designed to be the answer to the Iron Dome. The Shikan-4 carries a cluster munition warhead. During the terminal phase of its descent, as it approaches its target and enters the engagement envelope of defensive systems like the Iron Dome, the warhead casing opens. Inside that casing are 10 independent submunitions. Each submunition is equipped with GPS guidance. Each submunition has control fins that allow it to maneuver independently during its descent. Each submunition is a separate maneuvering guided weapon capable of striking a specific GPS coordinate with precision. 12 incoming missiles became 120 independent maneuvering targets in the final seconds before impact. The Iron Dome's engagement calculation, the computation that works reliably against a single incoming threat or a small number of simultaneous threats, was presented with a problem it was never designed to solve. Not 12 targets, not 20, 120 separate maneuvering projectiles arriving from multiple simultaneous directions, deploying at altitudes low enough that the engagement window was measured in seconds rather than minutes, each one following an unpredictable terminal flight path determined by its onboard guidance system rather than simple ballistic physics. The processing capacity of the Iron Dome system, the computational architecture that generates intercept solutions and manages interceptor allocation, has limits. Those limits are not a design flaw. They are the inevitable mathematical reality of any system that must compute solutions in real time against a finite number of simultaneous targets. The engineers who designed the Iron Dome built it to address the threat environment they were designing against. They built a system that could handle the rocket salvos fired from Gaza, the smaller ballistic threats from regional adversaries, the threat profile that existed when the system was conceived and developed. They did not build a system that could handle 120 simultaneous maneuvering targets arriving in under 2 minutes. Because when the Iron Dome was designed, that threat did not exist. It does now. The approach vectors of the 12 K-bar Shikan 4 missiles were not chosen arbitrarily. The IRGC had planned this strike with a level of operational sophistication that reflected years of studying Israeli air defense architecture, mapping the coverage patterns of the Iron Dome batteries around Ben Gurion, and identifying the approach angles that would place maximum strain on the defensive system's ability to manage simultaneous engagements. The missiles did not approach from a single direction. They came from multiple simultaneous vectors, requiring the Iron Dome batteries to divide their attention and their interceptor allocation across different threat axes at the same moment that each of those threats was multiplying itself tenfold through submunition deployment. The batteries detected the incoming missiles. The system tracked them. The intercept solutions were generated. The 31 interceptors were launched. And then, at the moment the Iron Dome's computational architecture was executing those solutions, each of the 12 incoming threats ceased to be a single target and became 10. The intercept solutions that had been computed were now irrelevant. The interceptors that had been fired were now chasing targets that no longer existed in the locations the intercept calculations had specified. The system attempted to adapt. It could not adapt fast enough. The engagement window closed. The submunitions continued their descent. 4 struck the main runway in a pattern designed to maximize crater distribution across the maximum usable runway length. The craters they created, 15 meters wide, 5 meters deep, were not the random consequence of explosive impact. They were the result of submunitions striking specific runway coordinates selected to ensure that no section of the runway remained usable for wide-body aircraft operations. Runway repairs require excavation, compaction, and repaving with reinforced concrete capable of bearing the load of a fully fueled Boeing 747. The craters at Ben Gurion will require 4 to 6 months to repair properly. Any attempt to rush that timeline risks producing a runway surface that fails under operational loads. 3 submunition clusters struck the aircraft parking areas. 73 aircraft were on the ground when the missiles hit. Commercial aircraft from more than a dozen international carriers, military aircraft from the Israeli Air Force, wide-body jets fueled and positioned for early morning departures that would never happen. Wide-body aircraft carry tens of thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. When the submunition struck the parking aprons, the fuel tanks of the aircraft closest to the impact points ruptured and ignited. Aviation fuel burns at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Aircraft structures, aluminum airframes, composite materials, materials, avionics, everything that makes a modern commercial jet the most sophisticated transportation device ever built, melts at those temperatures. The aircraft that were not directly struck by submunitions were consumed by the fires that spread from the aircraft that were. By the time fire crews could respond with any meaningful capacity, the parking areas had become a field of burning metal that bore no resemblance to the aircraft that had been standing there 40 minutes earlier. 2 submunition clusters struck the fuel storage tanks. The fires those strikes ignited were still burning 18 hours after the attack. The aviation fuel that soaked into the ground surrounding the tank farm during the fire will require environmental remediation before those areas can be safely used for ground operations again. That remediation process adds 3 to 4 months to the repair timeline independently of the structural damage. 2 submunition clusters struck Terminal 3. The structural damage was sufficient to require demolition and complete reconstruction. Terminal 3 is not a building that can be repaired. It is a building that must be replaced. That replacement project is a 12 to 18-month construction effort under ideal conditions, with full material supply chains, full labor availability, and no ongoing threat environment disrupting the construction process. None of those ideal conditions currently exist. 1 submunition cluster struck the air traffic control tower. Without the tower, even a runway that had been repaired and a terminal that had been rebuilt would be unable to operate, because the aircraft that landed on that runway would have no guidance infrastructure to support their approach. The tower damage adds another critical path item to a repair timeline that is already measured in years rather than months. 89 people were killed. The majority of them were ground crews, overnight maintenance workers, and passengers sleeping in the terminal waiting for early morning departures. 234 people were wounded. In 112 seconds, Iran had destroyed the infrastructure that took decades to build and will take years to replace. The financial cascade that began at the moment of first impact on the morning of March 14th will continue compounding long after the physical fires are extinguished and the debris is cleared. El Al, Israel's national carrier, had 23 wide-body aircraft on the ground at Ben Gurion when the missiles struck. Boeing 787 Dreamliners, Boeing 777s, each aircraft valued at approximately $300 million. 23 aircraft at $300 million each represents approximately $6.9 billion in losses for a single airline in a single night. But the financial damage to El Al extends considerably beyond the replacement value of the destroyed aircraft, because those 23 planes constituted essentially the entirety of El Al's long-haul international fleet. El Al did not simply lose aircraft in the strike, it lost its capacity to operate international routes. The airline cannot fly passengers from Tel Aviv to New York or London or Frankfurt or Bangkok, not because the routes are suspended, not because the schedules have been disrupted, but because the physical aircraft that would fly those routes do not exist anymore. They are burned metal on the parking aprons of a closed airport. El Al faces bankruptcy, not the kind of financial distress that can be managed through government support and restructuring. The kind of operational paralysis that follows the destruction of an entire fleet, compounded by the insurance questions that make replacing that fleet an exercise in commercial impossibility. The insurers covering El Al are already indicating they will not renew policies for any replacement aircraft operating from Ben Gurion. That position is not arbitrary. It is the direct and logical consequence of a demonstrated threat environment in which 12 ballistic missiles struck a fully defended international airport and destroyed everything on the ground, while the defensive system designed to prevent exactly that outcome fired 31 interceptors and achieved 0 interceptions. No insurance actuary in the world can look at that outcome and produce a coverage model for replacement aircraft at the same location against the same threat. Without insurance, El Al cannot operate. Without operation, El Al cannot generate revenue. Without revenue, El Al cannot service its obligations or fund its reconstruction. The airline faces not just financial losses from the strike itself, but an insurance-driven operational paralysis that will persist regardless of when the airport physically reopens. Foreign airlines suffered parallel losses. United Airlines had 7 Boeing 787s on the ground. Lufthansa had 5 Airbus A350s. Delta had 4 Boeing 777s. British Airways had 3 Airbus A380s. Air France, KLM, Turkish Airlines and Emirates had a combined total of 12 additional aircraft parked at Ben Gurion, waiting for morning departures or having arrived late and scheduled to depart the following day. Combined foreign airline losses amount to approximately $4 to $5 billion, depending on aircraft type and insurance valuation. The Israeli Air Force lost 19 military aircraft stationed in the section of Ben Gurion used for logistics and military transport operations. FIF-15s in maintenance cycles, C-130 transport aircraft, smaller military planes used for reconnaissance and communications. Those losses degrade Israel's air transport capacity and reduce the number of airframes available for combat operations at a moment when that capacity is already under sustained pressure from 15 days of continuous high-intensity conflict. Total estimated aircraft losses across all categories, 73 aircraft destroyed. Combined estimated value, $12 to $15 billion. The largest single-event destruction of aircraft since September 11, 2001, when nearly 300 aircraft were destroyed or damaged across multiple American airports during a period when the entire United States airspace system was shut down. The insurance cascade flowing from those losses will ultimately prove more strategically significant than the physical destruction itself, because it will determine whether Ben Gurion can function as an international airport even after the physical repairs are complete. Aviation insurance operates on the foundational principle that catastrophic events are statistically rare. An airport that is struck by 12 ballistic missiles in a single attack is, in the actuarial language of the insurance industry, a demonstrated high-risk environment. The models that determine premium pricing and coverage availability for aviation operations are not political documents. They are mathematical assessments of the probability that a covered loss event will occur. Ben Gurion, as of March 14th, is an airport where a catastrophic loss event has occurred, where the defensive systems designed to prevent that event failed completely, and where the head of government of the country in which that airport is located has publicly stated, on camera, that he cannot guarantee the same event will not occur again. Netanyahu's post-attack statement, "We cannot guarantee it will not be hit again," was not a political communication failure. It may have been the most honest statement a head of government has made about a military situation in this conflict, but its honesty is precisely what makes it so financially devastating. Because every insurer, every airline executive, every corporate risk manager, and every investor who heard that statement now has a direct quotation from the Israeli Prime Minister confirming what the attack had already demonstrated. The threat is real, the defenses are insufficient, the outcome could repeat. Insurance pricing models cannot ignore that statement. Airlines cannot ignore it. Foreign companies with operations in Israel that depend on air connectivity cannot ignore it. The investors who had been evaluating Israeli technology sector opportunities cannot ignore it. The weekly economic cost of Ben Gurion's closure is approximately $2 to $3 billion. Tourism revenue at $450 million per week. Business travel at $200 million per week. Cargo operations at $100 million per week. The indirect costs, reduced foreign investment, cancelled contracts, corporate relocations, delayed medical supply chains, suspended research partnerships, deferred manufacturing deliveries, accumulate on top of those direct losses in ways that are difficult to quantify precisely but impossible to ignore in aggregate. If the airport remains closed for a full year, the total economic damage could exceed $150 billion, and that figure does not include the insurance cascade, the El Al bankruptcy proceedings, or the long-term investment deterrence effect of a prime minister who publicly acknowledged he cannot defend his country's only international airport against the weapon that just destroyed it. Benin Frejus no Jacken 50 a Mything, Trau de Prejus no Jacken 50 a Mything, Trumtatadau Diva, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier Pekin 50 a Pytratija Pitudau de Vest, Tom Didier. 4 hours after the attack, Netanyahu convened an emergency cabinet meeting. According to sources present at that meeting, he was presented with a retaliatory option: striking Imam Khomeini International Airport in Tehran on the principle of direct equivalence. Iran destroyed Israel's airport. Israel would destroy Iran's airport. Netanyahu decided against it. The reasoning his advisers presented was specific and unambiguous. Striking a civilian airport in Tehran would kill hundreds of Iranian civilians and cross a threshold that would make it impossible to maintain international support for Israeli military operations. It would invite further Iranian strikes against Israeli civilian infrastructure. And critically, it would not solve the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is not that Iran has an international airport. The fundamental problem is that Israel cannot currently defend Ben Gurion against Iranian ballistic missiles. Destroying Imam Khomeini International Airport does not change that defensive incapacity. It does not restore Israel's air connectivity. It does not reopen Ben Gurion. It does not resolve the insurance crisis. It does not bring the foreign airlines back. The decision not to retaliate in kind reflects a strategic reality that the attack itself exposed with a clarity that no amount of official messaging can obscure. Israel can strike targets in Iran. It has been doing so continuously for 15 days. But it cannot currently prevent Iran from striking targets in Israel with the precision and penetration that 12 missiles demonstrated at Ben Gurion on the morning of March 14th. The historical parallel that defense analysts are already referencing provides the clearest lens through which to understand the strategic logic Iran executed on March 14th. On July 13, 2006, Israeli Air Force jets struck Rafik Hariri International Airport in Beirut during the Second Lebanon War. The attack destroyed runways and put the airport out of service for weeks. Israel's stated justification was that Hezbollah was using the airport to transport weapons and personnel, and that disrupting that logistics chain was a military necessity. The international community condemned the strike as a disproportionate use of force against civilian infrastructure. The precedent it established that a functioning international airport could be rendered a legitimate military target under the logic of disrupting an adversary's logistics and connectivity was noted and filed by every military planning apparatus in the region. 20 years later, Iran executed the same strategic logic against Israel. The differences between the two strikes illuminate the precise magnitude of what happened at Ben Gurion. The 2006 strike on Beirut's airport damaged runways and disrupted operations for weeks. Traffic was redirected through Damascus and other regional airports. Lebanon's air connectivity was reduced but not eliminated, because Lebanon, unlike Israel, has alternative routing options through its neighbors. The 2025 strike on Ben Gurion destroyed runways, the terminal, the control tower, the fuel storage, and 73 aircraft. The repair timeline is measured in years, not weeks. And Israel, unlike Lebanon, has no alternative routing options. There are no neighboring airports that can absorb Israel's international air traffic. When Ben Gurion closes, Israel's international air connectivity is not reduced. It is eliminated entirely. The strategic logic of infrastructure targeting, established and legitimized by Israel's own 2006 precedent, has now been applied against Israel with a precision, a scale, and a permanence that the 2006 strike never approached. The precedent was set, the lesson was learned, the application was executed 20 years later with 12 missiles in under 2 minutes. The precedent was set, The question that every defense ministry, every military planning staff, and every strategic analyst is now examining with urgent attention is the question that Ben Gurion's destruction made unavoidable. What comes next? Not in terms of Israeli military response, not in terms of the trajectory of the immediate conflict, but in terms of the doctrine, the technology, and the strategic logic that the Khaybar Shikan IV's successful employment at Ben Gurion has now validated for every military force on Earth that has been watching this conflict with professional interest. The cluster munition-submunition approach to defeating missile defense architecture is not unique to Iran. The concept is understood by every advanced military. The specific implementation that Iran deployed represents years of engineering effort aimed at a specific vulnerability in a specific defensive system. But the underlying principle, converting a small number of incoming threats into a large number of simultaneous maneuvering terminal targets in order to overwhelm the processing capacity of point defense systems, is a principle that is now demonstrated, validated, and available as a template. Every military that has invested in missile defense architecture is tonight running the same calculation. Would our system have done better than the Iron Dome against 120 simultaneous maneuvering submunitions? The honest answer for every currently deployed system is no. The engagement mathematics do not improve dramatically with different interceptor types or different radar systems if the fundamental problem is computational saturation at the intercept solution generation stage. The defensive response to this class of weapon requires not an upgrade to existing systems, but a fundamental architectural rethinking of how terminal defense works. Distributed low-altitude intercept networks rather than centralized battery-based systems. Computational architectures designed specifically for volumetric saturation scenarios rather than optimized for single target or small number of target scenarios. Directed energy systems that are not subject to the same interceptor allocation constraints as kinetic intercept missiles. The solutions that exist in research programs and laboratory proposals, the solutions that defense establishments have not prioritized because the threat they address had not yet been demonstrated at operational scale against a real target. Ben Gurion is the demonstration. The threat is now proven. The vulnerability is now confirmed. The defensive ceiling of an entire generation of missile defense technology has been publicly identified, publicly tested, and publicly found insufficient in under 2 minutes against 12 missiles. Every defense ministry on Earth is updating its procurement priorities tonight. Every military planning staff is revising its assessment of what is achievable with a relatively small number of well-designed ballistic missiles against a defended fixed infrastructure target. Every adversary of every country that has invested in Iron Dome-class defensive systems is studying the Khaybar Shikan IV's terminal engagement profile and asking the same question. How many of these do we need? Here is where the complete strategic picture stands on day 15 of this conflict. More than 14,000 Iranian civilians have been confirmed killed since February 28th. 19 American service members have been killed across the region. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for 15 days with no mine-clearing operation confirmed. Oil is above $115 per barrel. Iranian missiles have struck vessels in the Mediterranean, and now the only international airport in Israel has been destroyed by 12 missiles in under 2 minutes, with 73 aircraft burned, 89 people killed, and a repair timeline of 6 to 18 months before operations can resume, if insurers agree to cover them at all. The military campaign and the economic campaign are not parallel operations in what Iran is executing. The economic campaign is the primary one. The military campaign is the mechanism that enables it. Cutting Israel's air connectivity does not win a battle. It does not capture territory. It does not destroy a military unit or degrade a weapons system or eliminate a commander. What it does is something more durable and more strategically significant than any of those battlefield outcomes. It isolates a country. It paralyzes its economy. It severs its commercial relationships. It degrades its ability to import, to export, to attract investment, to project the basic stability that foreign partners require before they will commit capital and personnel and long-term agreements to a country in your economic ecosystem.